Most people assume vegetables always grow better in the ground. More soil, more space, more room for the roots to stretch out. It sounds obvious, but surprisingly, some of the most rewarding plants you can grow actually do better in a pot on your patio than they ever would in a big garden bed. And once you understand why, you may never look at that bag of soil the same way again. Think about the space you already have. A sunny balcony, a few empty containers by the back door, a windowsill that catches the morning light. That small space might outproduce a sprawling row garden with a fraction of the work and almost none of the weeding. Today we're counting down 15 vegetables and herbs that flourish in containers, often more than they would in the ground. And stay with me all the way to number 1, because that final plant can keep feeding you for years after a single planting. You put it in once, and it just keeps coming back, multiplying on its own season after season. Most people have never even heard of it. Before we start, do something simple for me. Drop your growing zone and which direction your balcony or window faces in the comments. South, north, east, or west. It helps more than you think. Now, let's get started. At number 15, we have bok choy. Most people think of bok choy as a finicky, cool season crop that bolts the moment summer arrives, sending up a flower stalk and turning bitter before you ever get to eat it. And in the ground, that's often exactly what happens. But in a container, you hold the cards. Here's the simple science. Bok choy bolts when its roots get warm and stressed, especially in late spring. The soil in the ground heats slowly, but holds that heat, and you can't move it. A pot, though, you can pick up and carry into afternoon shade on a hot day, then bring it back into morning sun. That small move keeps the roots cool, and cool roots mean sweet, crisp leaves instead of a bitter flower stalk. Bok choy has shallow roots, so you don't need anything deep. A pot about 8 inches across and 6 inches deep is plenty for the baby varieties. Fill it with a light potting mix, keep it evenly moist, and feed it once with a balanced fertilizer about 2 weeks in. From seed to harvest takes as little as 45 days for the smaller types. And the best part is, you don't have to take the whole plant. Snip the outer leaves and let the center keep growing. One pot becomes a steady supply, not a single dinner. And that idea, harvesting leaf by leaf, leads us straight to number 14. At number 14, mustard greens. People picture mustard greens as a big southern field crop, something that needs rows and acreage. But surprisingly, mustard is one of the fastest, most generous things you can grow in a single pot, and the flavor you get at home is something the grocery store can't match. The reason comes down to freshness and control. Mustard greens get their signature peppery bite from compounds that are strongest when the leaves are young and the plant is growing fast. In a container, you control the water and the feeding so the plant never stalls. And you harvest the leaves minutes before they hit your plate. That heat, that fresh, sharp flavor, fades within hours of cutting, which is exactly why store-bought mustard greens taste flat. A pot 10 inches wide will hold 3 or 4 plants. Sow the seeds shallow, barely covered, and they'll sprout in under a week. Keep the soil moist, give them 4 to 6 hours of sun, and you can start picking baby leaves in about 3 weeks. Mustard also shrugs off cold that would flatten other greens, so a pot by the door can feed you well into fall. And speaking of bold flavor from a single container, number 13 brings the scent of a tropical kitchen right onto your patio. At number 13, lemongrass. Most people assume lemongrass is a tropical plant that only belongs in a warm southern garden, something a northern gardener could never grow. But it turns out lemongrass is almost perfectly designed for container life, and a pot may actually be the smartest way anyone can grow it. Here's why. Lemongrass is a tender perennial. It loves heat and hates frost, and in most of the country, winter would kill it in the ground. But in a pot, you simply carry it indoors when the cold comes and set it by a bright window. The same plant survives year after year, getting bigger and more productive each season, while a garden-grown clump would be dead by Thanksgiving. It also grows from the grocery store. Take a fresh stalk with the base intact, set it in a glass of water on the windowsill, And in a couple of weeks, you'll see white roots appear. Pot it up in a container at least 12 inches wide, give it full sun and steady water, and it will multiply into a lush fountain of fragrant blades. You harvest by snapping off an outer stalk at the base whenever a recipe calls for it. The plant just keeps producing. And that ability to start something from a kitchen scrap carries beautifully into number 12. At number 12, nasturtium. Now you might be thinking a flower doesn't belong on a list of vegetables and herbs, but nasturtium is entirely edible. Leaves, flowers, and seed pods with a bright peppery flavor like watercress, and it's one of those plants that actually performs better when you treat it poorly. This is the surprising part. Nasturtium grown in rich garden soil produces a jungle of leaves and almost no flowers. Feed it well and it sulks. But in a container with lean, ordinary potting mix and no extra fertilizer, it bursts into bloom. The mild stress of a pot is exactly what triggers those vivid orange and red flowers. So the very thing that limits other plants is what makes this one shine. Sow the big seeds directly into a pot, about 10 inches wide, 1 inch deep. They germinate in a week or two. Give them sun, water when the top inch of soil dries, and resist the urge to fertilize. That neglect is the secret. The flowers are sweet and peppery in a salad. The young leaves add a sharp bite, and the green seed pods can be pickled like capers. One pot gives you 3 different harvests. And that idea of getting more than one thing from a single plant brings us to a true hidden gem at number 11. At number 11, shiso, also called perilla. Most American gardeners have never grown it, and that's a quiet shame, because shiso is a stunning, fragrant herb that practically thrives on the conditions a pot provides. In the ground, it self-seeds so aggressively it can become a nuisance. In a container, that vigor works entirely in your favor. Shiso tastes like nothing else, a mix of mint, basil, and a hint of cinnamon and citrus, with leaves in deep purple or bright green. It loves warmth and consistent moisture, both of which are easy to manage in a pot you can position in the sun and water on schedule. Because the roots are contained, the plant pours its energy into broad, flavorful leaves instead of spreading underground. Use a container about 10 to 12 inches wide. Start it from seed after the soil warms, or buy a young plant. Pinch the growing tips often, and the plant branches out, doubling your leaf supply and staying bushy instead of tall and leggy. Pinch off the flower spikes when they appear, and the leaves stay tender and sweet all season. It's a plant that rewards a little attention with a lot of flavor. And from a fragrant leaf, we move to something crisp and refreshing at number 10. At number 10, bush cucumbers. People hear cucumber and imagine sprawling vines taking over half the yard, climbing the fence, swallowing the tomatoes, and classic vining cucumbers really do need that room. But the compact bush varieties were practically made for a pot, and they often outproduce their vining cousins in a small space. The science here is about air and water control. Cucumbers are prone to powdery mildew and root diseases when their leaves stay damp and crowded against the soil. In a raised container with good airflow, the foliage dries faster after rain or watering, and that simple difference dramatically cuts disease. You're also watering the roots directly, not the whole bed, so the plant stays evenly hydrated, which keeps the fruit from turning bitter. Choose a bush variety like Space Master or a patio type, and give it a pot at least 5 gallons in size, around 12 inches deep. Cucumbers are thirsty, so check the moisture daily in summer. A small trellis or even a tomato cage gives the short vines something to lean on, which keeps the fruit clean and straight. One healthy plant in a 5-gallon pot can give you dozens of crisp cucumbers across a season. And if you think a pot can't handle a real vegetable, the next plant will change your mind at number 9. At number 9, leaf celery, also called cutting celery. Regular celery has a reputation as one of the hardest vegetables to grow, demanding constant water, rich soil, and a long, cool season just to produce those pale, crunchy stalks. Most home gardeners try it once, get stringy, disappointing results, and give up. But leaf celery is a completely different, far more forgiving plant, and it's tailor-made for a container. Instead of fighting to blanch thick stalks, you grow leaf celery for its abundant, intensely flavored leaves and slender stems. The flavor is stronger than ordinary celery, so a little goes a long way in soups, stocks, and salads. Because you're not trying to produce those giant stalks, you skip the fussiest part of growing celery entirely. And a pot gives you exactly the steady moisture this plant craves. Use a container about 8 inches deep and keep the soil consistently damp, never letting it dry out completely. Give it morning sun and a bit of afternoon shade in hot climates. You harvest by cutting outer stems at the base, and the plant keeps sending up more. One pot can flavor your cooking for months. Now, here's something for those of you who've been gardening in the ground for years and think none of this applies to you. If you already have a thriving in-ground garden, you might assume container tricks are for apartment dwellers, not for you. But here's something you can do this very weekend with nothing you don't already own. Take your most disease-prone crop, the basil that always wilts, the peppers that never quite take off, and move just one of them into a pot of fresh potting mix set on your patio. You'll be giving those roots clean soil, free of the fungi and pests that build up in any garden bed over the years. That single isolated pot becomes your control, your safe backup. If something sweeps through your garden, your potted plant, with its own clean soil and better airflow, often sails right through untouched. Many longtime gardeners are stunned to find their best pepper or their healthiest herb growing in a humble container, not in the prized garden bed they've tended for a decade. The lesson isn't that the ground is bad. It's that control is powerful, and a pot hands you control you simply can't get in open soil. And nervous beginners, hear this, you cannot really mess these plants up. Overwatering is the most common mistake, and the fix is just a drainage hole and a finger in the soil to check before you pour. That's the whole secret. Now, back to the countdown, because number 8 is one of the most fragrant herbs you can grow. At number 8, marjoram. It often gets dismissed as just a milder version of oregano, the herb people grab instead when they can't find anything more exciting. But marjoram has a sweet, delicate flavor all its own, and it happens to grow far better in a pot than in most garden beds for one clear reason. Marjoram comes from the dry, sunny hillsides of the Mediterranean, where the soil is poor and water drains away fast. In a typical garden bed, especially one that's been amended with rich compost and holds moisture, marjoram tends to rot or grow weak and flavorless. A container with a free-draining mix recreates that lean, gritty homeland almost perfectly, and the plant responds with concentrated aromatic oils, which is where all the flavor lives. Use a pot about 8 inches wide, add a handful of sand or perlite to sharpen the drainage, and place it in full sun. Water only when the top inch of soil is dry. That slight dryness stresses the plant just enough to make the leaves more flavorful, not less. Pinch it back regularly and it stays compact and bushy. Marjoram is also tender, so a pot lets you bring it indoors for winter. And that same love of sharp drainage flips completely on its head with the plant at number 7. At number 7, watercress. Here's a plant whose name tells you everything about why most people think they can't grow it. Watercress grows in running streams, in cold, clean water, the kind of thing you'd find in the wild, not on a balcony. It sounds impossible without a creek in your backyard. But surprisingly, watercress is one of the easiest things to grow in a simple container, and you don't need flowing water at all. The trick is the opposite of nearly every other plant on this list. Watercress wants its roots wet all the time. So you grow it in a pot with no drainage worries, and you set that pot inside a saucer or tray that you keep filled with water. The soil stays constantly saturated, mimicking that stream bank, and the plant thrives. Change the water every couple of days to keep it fresh, and that's the whole method. Sow the tiny seeds on the surface of damp potting mix, or root a sprig from a grocery store bunch in a glass of water first. Give it partial shade, especially in summer, since it hates baking heat. Watercress is one of the most nutrient-dense greens you can eat, and a single tray can supply peppery handfuls for months. And from a plant that wants endless water, we turn to one prize for both flavor and beauty at number 6. At number 6, salad burnet. Almost nobody grows it anymore, which is a quiet loss because this old-fashioned herb tastes exactly like fresh cucumber and stays green and harvestable when almost everything else has given up for the season. And a container suits it better than the ground in one important way. Salad burnet is a tough, drought-tolerant perennial that resents soggy, heavy soil. In a garden bed that stays wet, it struggles. In a well-drained pot, it forms a beautiful rosette of lacy leaves and keeps producing through cold weather that would knock out tender herbs. In milder areas, it stays green all winter, giving you a fresh cucumber-flavored garnish in the middle of January, when the idea of anything fresh feels like a small miracle. Give it a pot about 10 inches wide with ordinary potting mix and good drainage. Plant it in spring, place it in full sun to partial shade, and water moderately. It's remarkably low maintenance once established. Harvest the young inner leaves, since the older ones turn slightly bitter, and keep snipping to encourage tender new growth. As a perennial, it returns year after year from that single pot. And that idea of a plant that keeps coming back leads us toward the top of our list, starting with number 5. At number 5, garlic chives. Regular chives are common enough, but garlic chives are the quiet overachiever of the container world, giving you a gentle garlic flavor from flat green leaves without the work of growing and curing actual garlic bulbs. And they may be one of the most foolproof perennials you can keep in a pot. Here's what makes them special. Garlic chives are tough, almost to the point of being indestructible. They tolerate poor soil, irregular watering, heat and cold, and they come back every single spring with no replanting. In a container, you contain their one downside, which is that they self-seed freely and can spread where you don't want them. A pot keeps that energy focused into a dense, productive clump. Use a container about 8 to 10 inches across. Plant from seed or a small division. Give it a few hours of sun and water when the soil dries. That's essentially the entire care routine. The plant does the rest. Snip the leaves an inch above the soil and they regrow within weeks. The white flowers in late summer are edible too, with a sweet garlic taste. One pot can produce for years on end. And speaking of plants that deliver far more than their size suggests, number 4 is a true container superstar. At number 4, dwarf and determinate tomatoes. Now, everyone knows tomatoes grow in pots, but most people reach for the wrong kind, grabbing a sprawling, indeterminate variety that grows 6 feet tall, flops over, and overwhelms a small container. The real secret is that the compact, dwarf, and determinate types don't just tolerate pots, they genuinely prefer them, and they can outproduce a struggling in-ground plant in the same square footage. The reason is heat and root warmth. Tomatoes are tropical at heart, and their roots love warmth. A dark container sitting in the sun warms up faster than cool garden soil, especially early in the season, and that warmth pushes earlier flowering and earlier fruit. You also sidestep soil-borne diseases like verticillium and fusarium wilt that live in old garden ground, because you're starting with fresh, clean mix. Choose a variety bred for containers like Tiny Tim, Patio, or any dwarf type. Give it a pot at least 5 gallons in size. Feed it regularly and water deeply and consistently to prevent the fruit from cracking or developing blossom end rot. A single determinate plant in a good-sized pot can deliver a heavy flush of ripe tomatoes you'll be giving away to neighbors. And from the sweetness of a ripe tomato, we move to a plant that brings the heat at number 3. At number 3, chili peppers. People assume peppers need long, hot summers and plenty of garden space to produce a real crop. But surprisingly, peppers are one of the plants that respond most dramatically to container growing, and a pot can give you a bigger, hotter, more productive harvest than the ground ever would. This comes down to root temperature and a little controlled stress. Pepper roots crave warmth, and a container heats up faster and stays warmer than open soil, which peppers absolutely love. Even better, peppers actually produce more and hotter fruit when they're slightly stressed by being a touch root-bound and not overwatered. A garden bed gives them too much room and too much moisture, so they grow lush and leafy with fewer pods. A snug pot focuses that energy straight into the fruit. A 2 to 3 gallon pot is ideal for most varieties. Give them all the sun you can, water when the top inch dries, and go easy on the nitrogen, since too much makes leaves instead of peppers. In cold regions, peppers are perennial in disguise, so you can overwinter the plant indoors and get an earlier, larger crop the next year. That single overwintered pepper plant can become a powerhouse in its second season. And that brings us to the final two, where the very best are waiting. Number 2 is something you've almost certainly bought at the store, never knowing how easily it grows at home. At number 2, ginger. Most people would never dream of growing ginger, assuming it needs a tropical climate and a specialist touch. But it turns out a piece of ginger from the grocery store, set in a shallow pot, will quietly grow into one of the most rewarding plants you can keep, and a container is honestly the only sensible way to grow it in most of the country. Ginger grows from rhizomes, those knobby roots you already cook with. It needs warmth, humidity, and a long growing season, none of which the open ground reliably offers in a temperate climate. But a wide, shallow pot, since ginger roots spread sideways rather than down, lets you provide exactly the warm, rich, moist conditions it craves, and move it indoors when nights turn cold. Choose a plump piece with visible growth buds, those little eyes, and let it sit out a day so the cut surface dries. Lay it just below the surface of rich, well-draining potting mix in a pot at least 12 inches wide. Keep it warm, moist, and in bright indirect light. Be patient, because it's slow to start, but once it sprouts, it grows lush and beautiful. After 8 to 10 months, you can tip out the pot and harvest fresh, tender ginger far better than anything from a store. And now, the plant you've been waiting for, the one that keeps on giving year after year from a single planting. Number 1. At number 1, Egyptian walking onions. Almost no one has heard of them, and that's exactly why this is the secret payoff of the whole list. Because once you plant these in a container, you may never have to plant onions again. They are one of the most extraordinary, self-sustaining plants you can grow, and a pot is the perfect home for them. Here's what makes them so remarkable. Instead of flowering and setting seed at the top of the stalk, the Egyptian walking onion grows a cluster of tiny new bulbs called top sets, right up in the air. As those top sets get heavier, they bend the stalk over until it touches the ground, and the little bulbs root and grow into brand new plants. The onion literally walks across its pot, planting itself over and over, year after year. You plant it once, and it keeps producing harvests for years, multiplying on its own with no effort from you. This perennial habit is documented and prized by gardeners and historians alike. These onions have been grown in American gardens for well over a century, passed plant to plant rather than bought as seed, precisely because they're so generous and so hardy. They survive brutal cold and bounce right back in spring. In a container, you get the best of all worlds. You give them a pot about 12 inches deep and wide, full sun, and ordinary potting mix with good drainage. Plant a few top sets or a small bulb in late summer or fall, and they'll establish before winter. Come spring, you'll have crisp green onion tops to snip whenever you like, plus the underground bulbs to dig and the top sets to eat or replant. You truly cannot exhaust them. Harvest the green tops all season, and they keep regrowing. Let a few top sets fall, and next year's crop plants itself. One small pot becomes a perpetual onion factory that asks for almost nothing in return. For anyone who wants real food from a tiny space with the least possible work, nothing on this list beats an onion that plants itself season after season on a single sunny corner of your balcony. And that's the quiet truth running through this entire list. Successful growing was never about having more land or pouring in more hours of labor. It's about using the space you already have intelligently and choosing the plants that are genuinely suited to it. A few well-placed pots, the right plants, and a little understanding of what each one actually wants. That's a garden. That's real food. The goal was never perfection. It's consistency. The simple, steady pleasure of stepping outside and gathering something fresh, grown by your own hand, in whatever small space life has given you. If you'd rather grow real food simply in the space you have than overspend and overwork for it, then you're exactly the kind of person these pots were made for. So tell me in the comments your growing zone and which direction your balcony or window faces, south, north, east, or west. Go ahead and type it now, because it helps other growers near you, and it helps me point you toward what will thrive in your exact spot. Don't just think it, leave the comment. And if you'd like to keep growing more with less, in a calm and simple way, consider subscribing, because this is a quiet community of people doing exactly that. In the next video, we'll uncover a plant so productive that a single container can keep your kitchen supplied for the better part of a year, and almost no one thinks to grow it. Until then, take it slow and let something grow.